Welcome back, everyone, to our podcast, Cry, Laugh, Eat, Making Friends with Your Emotions. My name is Ruth, and I want to say a special Brazilian hello to our listeners in Brazil. Oi!
And bonjour to our listeners in France. I am Helen, and it's great to have you with us today. Last week, we let you know at the end of our episode that we would talk about 3 things that you can do when you feel discomfort. We're following up on discomfort and giving some more practical ideas. So, Ruth, do you want to share that story that you told me about a while ago where you were quite uncomfortable?
Not really. I want our listeners to know that prior to this episode, when we were preparing for it, we were sharing and comparing our discomfort stories. And
Ruth won.
I did not. I was told to share mine. So I'll just quickly share an experience I had where I really felt a great deal of discomfort and how I didn't actually listen to those feelings of discomfort and what they led to. So I was attending a meeting about an hour away from where I live with an elderly couple in my church. They kindly offered to take me, and I didn't know them and they didn't know me, but I thought it was really lovely of them to offer a ride for me. So they picked me up and I thought, oh, they're just so sweet. And of course I totally relaxed. And then they started asking me questions about who I was. And then I started to feel just a little bit of discomfort because the questions got, I think, a little more intense and quite personal, and I'd only just met them really. Mm-hmm. And I started to feel really uncomfortable, but I ignored the discomfort. And in my discomfort, I think I reverted to childhood where when adults are speaking to you, you know, you just, especially those that are older, you just
answer politely.
That's right. And so I went into child mode and just answered them politely, telling them everything about me except how much I weighed, which I don't tell anyone that I'm not going to kill. So basically they knew almost everything personal about me, and I had just met them. Mm-hmm. By the time that conversation was coming to an end, it was about 20 minutes into the drive, the 1-hour drive, and instead of feeling uncomfortable, I actually moved from discomfort to shame. I felt ashamed. So that's what happens when you ignore discomfort.
You move to shame.
Well, you move to something else that is more uncomfortable. Discomfort, I'm discovering, it's like a little warning bell. Really, it's such a great friend. It just lets you know that, hey, what you're feeling at the moment, that awkwardness and just an unease, like I just felt a little bit tiny sick in the stomach. And the other thing I remember was my brain froze and I started to feel red. I felt like myself
red in the cheeks.
So there was a little bit of heat going on there as well as a brain freeze. And yeah, just like I said, I just kicked into child mode. Be obedient, respect your elders. And so I just carried on answering them.
So and thank you for sharing that, Ruth. For the listeners, before we go into our 3 things to do that might be helpful, I think a key point in what you brought up there was when you first started sharing the story, then you said you ignored it. What do you think were the little signals that you ignored?
Just an uneasy feeling. Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. And then as I kept ignoring that, then I started to go a bit red-faced. Mm-hmm. I could feel the heat in my cheeks. And then I just felt a little bit of a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. Mm. But they weren't intense. That was the point. They were just so subtle.
Mm. And do you think because they're subtle, that's what makes it easy for us to ignore them?
Of course it is. I mean, when you're angry, it's full blown and there's a great deal of passion going on and you just know you're angry. It's really obvious, or when you're hurt or whatever. But when you feel discomfort, it's just like a little prod. And you can ignore a prod.
That's right. Another point you said at the end is after ignoring and falling into that space of going into a childhood response, really.
Automated response.
An automated response, and that you must answer. Tell us a little bit more how that left you feeling. You talked about feeling ashamed. What do you think was happening there?
I'm not really sure what was happening. I just know I can only describe it as shame. And I've learnt something about shame, which I want to share with the listeners because I think it's really important. So many of us feel shame about different things. It could be shame about our weight. It could be shame about how we look. Could be shame about things that we may have done last week, last year, when we were young or when we're older. Just shame about so many things.
Sometimes people carry a sense of shame actually about who they are, full stop.
Exactly.
That they're not worth much.
Yeah, and I really want to share this definition of shame because it really helped me. It's from Brené Brown, the wonderful Brené Brown.
Yes.
And I want to read what she said about shame. Quote, I define shame as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Something we've experienced, done or failed to do that makes us unworthy of connection, unquote. Isn't that wonderful? Because I think that's what I went back to. Went back to the childhood of feeling unworthy of being loved and not feeling like I belonged. All those feelings, I guess, were tied up in that feeling of shame. And I just want to finish with this, what she said about shame. She said, I don't believe shame is helpful or productive. Amen, I say to that. She said, in fact, I think shame is much more likely to be the source of destructive, hurtful behaviour than the solution or cure. And I think the fear of disconnection can make us dangerous, unquote. What do you think of that, PB?
I just love Brené Brown's work, and I think it's so true. Sometimes when people feel shame, it can fuel behaviour that perhaps would not ordinarily be them.
Yeah, because sometimes they, in that unworthy feeling that they might have of love and belonging, they seek for it, but perhaps in unhealthy ways.
That's right.
And behaviours.
And then there's others that carry a shame about who they are and withdraw and pull away from people, from opportunities. They just wouldn't try things because they carry this sense of shame of not being as good as others or worth as much as someone else.
And you shared something earlier, Helen, when we were preparing for this episode about shame, and I really liked it.
I'm pretty sure that I learnt this from Brené Brown too. Guilt is the knowing and feeling that you've done something wrong. So that can drive you to change. It's a good thing. Guilt can help us.
It's
be
really
inspired.
helpful, isn't it?
Yeah.
And helps us to adapt.
Yes, to change, to apologise, to whatever. So guilt is that I've done something wrong, whereas shame is I am something wrong. And see the difference?
Yeah,
when you've
that's
done
huge.
something wrong, you can do something about it. But when you have shame and think I am something wrong, that is so destructive.
It really is, because I'm just thinking now that shame that I was feeling with that elderly couple, I was feeling that I had done something wrong when I hadn't at all.
Well, you hadn't.
It was them.
That's exactly right.
These gentle, innocent
Interrogators. And that's what shame can do as we slip into it. I love that Brené Brown describes that shame exists in darkness and in secrecy and hidden. It's often secret to ourselves because we don't realize it's there. But when you bring it out into the light and talk about how you're feeling, it dissolves. It cannot keep living in the light.
It diminishes, doesn't it?
Yes, that's right.
In the light. So if you bring it out and you're open about it.
It's a great thing when you understand the difference between guilt and shame, and when you understand that when you fall into shame or carry shame within you, it is destructive.
And it's interesting because all that came, well, in my experience, I was led down the path to shame by ignoring discomfort. So let's go back now to discomfort and share 3 tools. So our 3 tools rhyme so that it's easier for you to, well, actually easier for us to remember.
So the 3 are name it,
Name,
reframe it,
reframe,
and claim it.
claim. So you've got name, reframe, and claim.
So the first one, as we said, is name it. When we say name it, we mean being able to put words to what you are feeling.
So I try and identify that feeling. And like we said, discomfort's really hard because it's just like a little poke with your index finger.
Naming it is so important. Like on a personal level, years ago, a good friend and social worker taught me about naming. She'd always say to me, you have to name it, Helen. When I was in an abusive relationship, and she'd say, you have to name it. When you name it, it gives you power to understand. What I have learned is when you name what you're feeling, what you are experiencing, you actually begin to see it clearly. You stop pushing it away, like ignoring that discomfort of what you're going through. So naming something empowers you.
Very much so. And for me, I don't know about you, Helen, but for me, it makes things less overwhelming. It's kind of like if you don't know what's wrong, say, with your body, something's happening. You go to the doctor, you get a diagnosis and you feel a lot better. I mean, no one wants to know sometimes what that illness is, but once you know what you're dealing with and it's less overwhelming in some ways.
Well, that's right, because then you know the next steps that you can take.
Exactly. And I think you can ask yourself questions like, what exactly am I feeling? And I think that word exactly is really helpful when you're trying to name it. For instance, instead of just saying that, I just feel off, you might identify that off feeling as anxiety, or you might think, I feel quite vulnerable, which is what I realised discomfort was actually saying to me in the car. Right now you're very vulnerable and they don't realise it and I'm ignoring these feelings. So really trying to name what causes that discomfort is so helpful, like Helen said.
And it's that first step. And the second one is reframe it. Ruth, if you're okay with this, if we go back to your story, when you just said discomfort was letting you know that you were vulnerable, that's an important thing to know. You're vulnerable right now. How would reframing it have helped you if you knew that then?
Oh, it's a big question. I think now that I know a bit more, it's a little different. I think if I'm feeling uncomfortable in the future, I think it's taught me something, and I think that's important. Emotions help you to learn about yourself and connect with yourself and better with others. So for me, if I feel uncomfortable again, I wouldn't see it as a negative thing. I would actually see it as, it's a warning, it's your orange light. It's like, oh, you got to do something about this, or you're going to go down a pathway you don't really like.
So then, am I right in your situation that if you were able to name it, then naming it would be, I'm feeling really vulnerable right now.
Yep.
Then reframing it, you wouldn't have sunk into that shame feeling if you'd have known to look at it. Okay, this is all right. I can do something.
Okay, reframing it would begin first with seeing that feeling of discomfort as a friend. So for some of us, that might be picturing this little friend sitting next to you, or it may be just thinking, what is discomfort trying to teach me? Why did it prod me? What's happening here, and how can I use this feeling to learn something about myself and about this situation? So that's reframing it. It's not doing what I did, which was ignoring it, because it was a feeling that was subtle and barely noticeable at the beginning. But then as it intensified, it didn't feel nice. So I just ignored it even more.
And that's when you went into that space of being like a child.
But when you ignore feelings, they actually just sit somewhere in a quiet corner and wait for you. They don't actually go away.
No, that's right. And if you're new to our podcast and haven't listened from the beginning, we always talk about our emotions can be our friends. So when Ruth was talking about it sitting beside you, discomfort is part of the emotion disgust. So if discomfort, and we love disgust. It's such an interesting one. So if you haven't listened before, you could listen to one of our episodes on disgust and you'll understand it much more. But discomfort, if it was coming and sitting beside you, it would have a message. And that's what Ruth was saying. What can it teach you? What can you learn about you?
And the things I've learned about disgust as an emotion and all the feelings that come with it, discomfort being one of them, or uncomfortable feeling, is that it's there to protect you.
Mm-hmm.
It's your defender. It's an amazing emotion. And so reframing would be remembering that, hey, this is here to protect me. What do I do now? Why do I need protection?
So helping you name that you felt vulnerable
And then
reframing it, that's part of the protection, isn't it?
Sure is.
Which then would lead us into what you can do with that, which is the third one, claim it. And this is what that emotion can do for you, is let you know how you can claim it. Do you want to say more about claiming it, Ruth?
Definitely. I wish that I had, you see, in that moment of vulnerability, I had given my agency over to them. I had given my choices up to these other people, and claiming it was taking it back. It was actually taking responsibility for the way I was going to respond in that experience.
So could you give an example of how you could have responded if you knew to name it, reframe it, and then claim it? Well, how could you have taken responsibility in the car that day?
Okay, then, so remembering that claiming involves recognizing that while you can't control discomfort, and you don't want to do that because it's your friend, it's actually saying, this is information I'm giving you, needs attention, you do have control over how you respond to that. And I'd lost control because I just tried to ignore it. So if I was there now and I was at that moment and I had the presence of mind to actually go through the name, reframe and claim, I would most likely say to them, I appreciate your interest in me, but I don't feel comfortable in answering all your questions. Yeah, or something to that effect. I would have claimed back my power to respond rather than react. I would have shifted from what I think I put myself in, which was a victim mindset. I think I'd moved into that child, the helpless child. I'm an adult now. I'm a different person. I've got personal agency. I can choose now how to respond to things. I think all these things are wonderful afterwards.
Well, that is the usual way that we learn, isn't it?
Yes.
We go through something and then on self-reflection or looking back, we can go, oh, okay, I could try that next time. I could do this.
That's wonderful. And I love working with you, Helen, because you've helped me to become much more aware of how to make friends with your emotions. And I don't always sit there and go, oh, discomfort, name, reframe, claim.
Neither do I, just so you all know.
I mean, all these things that we share with you listeners, we're still working through ourselves, and we are so much more resilient and stronger. But I just know now that knowing the things that we know now and learning all this, it just makes such a difference. You become so much more confident and stronger and more resilient, and your relationships with others improve. Like Helen said, it's so empowering to learn about your emotions and how to make friends with them.
One of the greatest things is you grow in your relationship with yourself. You become to understand yourself better and you get more confident. And these little tools that we share along the way, they're just to help you grow and feel more confident in being you and getting to know yourself better and understanding what feel like complicated emotions at times and helping bring some clarity to those muddled up feelings that we all get.
We would so love to know a little bit more about you, and we invite you to drop us a line, share with us some of your thoughts and feelings about anything that we've spoken about today. We'd love to get to know you better.
You would, and you can look in the show notes and see the links to our website.
Thanks so much for joining us this week. Remember, next time you're feeling a little bit of discomfort, name, reframe, claim, and we promise you'll feel different. See you next week.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
This is what happens when your granddaughter discovers your podcasting equipment.
Welcome to the Helen and Macy show. Welcome.
So, Macy, here we are. Our show has begun. What would you like to say?
We're ready to have some fun.
We are ready.
We are ready.
Fun.
We are ready.
Come on to our podcast. Come and groove along. Macy's gonna sing you a really groovy song.
Yeah, yeah, cha cha cha. 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 Yeah, yeah, cha cha.
Well, we're going to finish our radio show now and say goodbye from me and goodbye from
Macy.
Macy. Bye, Macy.